complicated along the way. Believe me, it
Yeah.
was kind of crazy.
That's what
but,
I can't wait
yeah.
to talk to you about. My gosh.
But,
and
yeah,
how has
so-
it been? I mean, what's it like? Is it
Yeah,
good?
yeah. You're talking like just in general, like
Yeah.
the last few months. It is. It's busy. It's not without its challenges for sure, but it's also something that I feel matters. And a week like this kind of punctuates that point that it matters, and that gives me a lot of, I just kind of motivation to do it, because things like that happen and you can see a real direct outcome for somebody.
sure.
So, yeah.
We're good to go. If you have
Okay.
your phone, if you can put on silent.
Yes.
And then I didn't know if
The two shot, and then that's going to be the one shot on him, but just kind of keep looking at
Do you mind handing that to Kyle for me?
for sure.
Thank you.
and I
That
did
way it'll be out of the
email
way.
some questions impromptu, but I have them in my head.
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
All right.
All right.
sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well, we are joined now by Congressman Tom Barrett. Thank you so much for being here with us. You certainly have had a busy start to the new year.
We have, but it's been rewarding at the same time.
Very good. Everyone is the talk of the town right now is, of course, the Achaos and what you did to help bring them home. I'd like to know a little bit behind the scenes of how that was orchestrated. What part did you play in all of that?
Sure, and thank you. And like many other Americans, we kind of first learned about this about a week and a half ago when their family, kind of made the announcement of their captivity, and we're escalating this, and it was picked up by a lot of media and really made into a national interest story at that point. And we had learned from kind of friends of theirs the connection, and started working with their family very closely. The very first day we learned about this, I was in contact with their son and working with him, and then escalating it up through the State Department here in the United States. From there, we had to get a privacy release form from the couple, so the State Department had to visit them in the prison in Mexico to get that. So that took a couple of days. And from there, we were really working aggressively to try and see if we couldn't get a resolution to this that would get them back home. That was progressing throughout last week in what we thought at the time was a meaningful way, but by early this week we felt had stalled, and there was not a feeling of urgency involved. And so on Tuesday afternoon, I got a briefing from the State Department back here in the United States in my office in Washington, D.C. I felt like this had not progressed in the way we needed, and so I made the decision to fly down as quickly as I could to just bring about a resolution to this. Flew out Wednesday morning as quickly as I could, spent the rest of Tuesday evening working with the State Department on arrangements for us to arrive there. Met the Consular General when we arrived Wednesday around 11 o'clock in the morning, local time in Mexico. We went directly to the prison, met with Paul and Christy at the prison immediately upon our arrival. From there, we left the prison and went and met with the President of the Supreme Court of Mexico, began that process of negotiating some of the court proceeding side of it that can be very bureaucratic in Mexico. Their trial was not supposed to be for about a year from now, for example.
That's what I read.
So for us to be able to get them into a courtroom meant that we had to move a lot of channels to be able to do that. And then in the background, on a parallel track, we had to negotiate with the company around the terms of what we could agree to ultimately get them released and how that was going to work. And it took all day Wednesday, late into the night, dealing with the principals involved in the whole arrangement. Early Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, getting the parties together in a room, the attorneys together in a room, working through all of that. It was a complicated thing. I'm glad we were able to do it. I can't say enough about the Consular General and their staff on the ground in Mexico assisting us in ways of logistics and people we needed to meet with. And then the attorneys in Mexico that we were able to get for the two parties involved to really arrive at a resolution was something that was really important.
We saw pictures of you, outside of the prison, and we saw some of the conditions there. We saw you meeting with them, the couple, and we also saw you with the Consulate General. So we have a visual of what that looks like. And you're speaking of some, some mediation between the two lawyers, and no charges, but were there any financial obligations that they had to come to? Yeah,
and there was an announcement that was made, and I want to be careful not to violate confidentiality of some of the negotiations that I had with people to keep that their interests private as they asked me to do, and I want to respect that. But there was a public statement made where both parties did not assign blame or responsibility to either party. There was a financial resolution to this, which was the amount of the disputed charges was about $116,000, and both parties are putting funds of that amount, that equaling that amount, to go toward a Mexican charity that runs an orphanage down in Mexico. So the two parties are investing the money into that charitable nonprofit. So they were able to reach a resolution that way that benefits a nonprofit charity that runs an orphanage down in Mexico. The two parties made a mutual statement saying, that they regret that this had transpired this way. They're not assigning, blame to one another. And then the financial settlement will go to this charity that runs an orphanage down there. It's my understanding that Paul and Cindy maybe even volunteered at that orphanage at one point. They had traveled down to Mexico many times and maybe even volunteered at that orphanage in a prior visit that they had been there.
Interesting. I don't know John Shinsky, a former MSU football player, Graham Valley. He has an orphanage in Mexico. I'm not sure if that's the one.
Oh, I'm not sure.
No, we can look into that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And so bringing them home, one of my directors said that, surprised you didn't take a helicopter.
It would have taken a lot longer in a helicopter. We might have run out of fuel over the Gulf of America.
I know, I did think about that. But yeah, so a good resolution.
Yeah.
Everyone seems to be happy and they're home safe.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what I was trying to bring about with the parties. And, there had developed a lot of real genuine distrust of each other along the way, and we kind of got into this when some weeks had gone by where they were still in the prison in Mexico. And I looked at it from the standpoint of, number one, if you have a financial contract dispute in the United States, you handle that through civil litigation. You don't have a party in the desperate conditions that they were in down in Mexico as leverage for a settlement in a dispute of that kind. And for me, it wasn't so much who's responsible for which part of this and who's to blame for this and the other thing. I wasn't really interested in negotiating that part of it. I was interested in what can we do that will expedite their return, their safe release, and return home as quickly as possible. I thought about it from the standpoint, if my mom and dad were in a Mexican prison under the conditions that they were in, I would want somebody to do absolutely everything they could to get them out. And when I felt that the urgency of that was not being appropriately elevated, I felt that I needed to go down and do something about it. And I'm very proud and thankful we were able to get them out as quickly as we could. I wasn't sure all the way through the end if we were going to be able to stick the landing on this, but I'm very, very thankful we were able to get it done.
Very good. Let's switch gears now to tariffs. Let's talk about that. We saw what the stock market did, and we've seen, some things that's happening in the economy and some programs that are getting cut. What are your feelings about that? Do you still support tariffs?
Well, I can tell you that, for me, all of this was transpiring while I was in Mexico, and I was tuning out everything else as I was negotiating the safe release of Paul and Christy. That's been my singular focus over the last several days. And I think I can, really address each of those issues now that we're back home in the United States and really kind of take those in and analyze them in the fashion that we need to. But, look, as it stands right now, I haven't seen anybody present to me any argument that suggests these reciprocal countries' tariffs have not been applied against the United States. So a lot of the arguments against some of this haven't really demonstrated to me yet that shows that these reciprocal tariffs, many of which are double whatever the United States is even applying, if we want to have free trade and free markets and free economies, which is something I genuinely believe in, then you have to be free and level on both sides of that. And it appears that we all know there's been a distortion of those things and leveraging and currency manipulation and market distortions that have gone on for years. We in the Michigan delegation, the Republicans in the Michigan delegation, met with Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, just about 2 weeks ago. We were having a discussion about tariffs and trade, and she said for them at General Motors, they can't sell their vehicles very easily in foreign markets, oftentimes because of tariffs, but really the bigger challenge for them is the restrictive, barriers to entry that don't have any meaningful effect on the manufacturing process. They just make it different enough on purpose in a very manipulative way to prevent our markets from being sold in foreign countries. Meanwhile, we import plenty of foreign vehicles into the United States. So I think having things in a balance and having things in a clear mind is worth pursuing, because I believe, like most Americans, that we can make the greatest products here with the greatest workers that do them. We just got to be able to make sure that it's done in a fair and equitable process.
Yes, but the American people will feel a little pain, which I think they're feeling right now.
Well, I think we've got to get some time to determine what the total effect of this is going to be. Markets respond sometimes in a real dollars and cents effective way. Other times they respond in an emotional way. Stock markets can be driven by a lot of different things, economic fundamentals, but also by emotional reactions to things. So I think we have to have some time to determine what that looks like. And again, I can tell you, I've been so absorbed in the negotiations in a foreign country dealing with the safety of 2 Americans that I haven't really been advantaged to be able to read the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So that's not been on the top of my priority list because it's been superseded by other things that were more urgent.
Sure, understood. Let's talk, you're a military person, you've been in the military, served in the military. How do you feel about the journalists being included in that Signal app, in that text thread? Does that make you concerned about the security of our communications?
Well, it's absolutely concerning and it's unacceptable, and I think that we all can agree that having a journalist, no offense to journalists, but we shouldn't be sharing classified or concerning or sensitive information with people who are not privileged to know about that in a need-to-know basis. I want to see a thorough investigation done to determine how that was done, who added that person to that group, and then what the appropriate accountability measure of that is. I will say that a lot of the folks that are piling on to criticize this, and look, I think criticism is fair where it's appropriate, and this shouldn't have happened, and I'm the first one to admit that shouldn't happen. I have, a background of one that takes national security very seriously. I have a security clearance to the military that I had throughout my career, and I take those things very, very seriously in what they involve. But a lot of the folks from a political standpoint piling onto this were particularly silent when we had 13 of our service members killed in the collapse in Afghanistan, that we could all see and witness in real time the mistakes that were being made. Nobody was held accountable for that. Not a single person was fired in the Biden administration for that. We had billions of dollars of military equipment, classified military equipment that was left behind, and we handed the country over back to the Taliban after 20 years of American military presence there. Thousands of lives of Americans lost, including the 13 on that fatal day at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan. It was the most lethal attack on American troops since President Obama's first term in office. So if we want to look at things in a fair and consistent manner, I think some of the people that are stepping up to pile on blame and make a political point were noticeably silent when Americans were being killed. At least we know in this instance, to the best we can tell, the people that were killed were foreign terrorists, and that's not to discount the significance of handling sensitive information in the utmost care and attention, but I think we need to have an investigation as to what transpired and how that happened, and then make sure that we move forward in a way that doesn't allow that to happen going forward, and if accountability is appropriate, make sure we do that in the proper way.
There was a vote recently about allowing new mothers to vote remote, let's just say, and I think you had a vote against that as far as allowing them to vote kind of absentee remote, maybe. I'm not sure. I know, Jam, you put this. Help me with the dialogue on this, because I didn't put it in the.
Right. He knows it better than I do, but they tried to attach that to another measure. In the end result was that pregnant or members who've just given birth could vote. The debate was whether they could vote by proxy or not.
By proxy,
and
yes.
Your vote would have ended up not allowing that.
Sure. I don't know if you want to ask her.
Yes. Okay. So if you could speak to that, voting by proxy for new moms, and I know that we just talked about your 8-year-old daughter and your wife. You have a beautiful family together, and we saw them in your campaign. So what message does that send?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, none of my daughters are pregnant, so
right.
They're far too young for that. But I will say that the measure in Washington was really on setting our agenda for the bills we were going to vote on in Washington that week. And there was, to your point, some complicated attachments to that and everything else. And ultimately, the vote took place that did not allow the remaining bills to go forward on the agenda. It's an important protocol for me that I think, for everybody's benefit, we have a Capitol in our United States government in Washington, D.C., where members assemble from across districts throughout our country to go there and represent their district and cast the vote of the people of their district that sent them there to do that job. They only vote for a singular member of Congress. Every single district in America has one person on their behalf in Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives. Only one person. That person has to carry out that vote in a very disciplined fashion. And to me, we have to protect the expectation that people have and the accountability and the openness and transparency in government. If you can hand your vote to someone else, you are losing your attachment to that core responsibility that you have. I firmly believe that families ought to be, given absolutely every opportunity to build those family connections and build that, the attachment that comes with having a new child. I've done that 4 times in my own life, and my wife has taken maternity leave each time that we've had a child to really foster that growth and experience and everything, and that's something that I fully encourage. And all of us have jobs that we go to, and we have family obligations and family moments and personal moments that take us away from those jobs. And that's not to say that one can't be done because of the other. It just means if you can't be at work for this or that reason, then you need to prioritize whatever the specific situational moment is at that time. We ought to give every single appropriate attention and care to new moms and new dads so that they can really spend that time with their families. But it's no different than if you had a serious condition. We've had members of Congress who've had serious health conditions, people who have fallen gravely ill and been in the hospital or done other things, and you can imagine a scenario where people are just assigning their vote to other people in a way that would not keep in the expectation that they have that their member of Congress that they elected went to Washington, D.C. and cast the vote on behalf of the 800,000 people that they represent in a district here in the United States. That's something that we have to take very seriously. Otherwise, if you get right down to it, you could make an argument for a lot of reasons why it would make sense to accommodate somebody to give their vote away to someone else. And that's something that I just think we need to be very mindful and protective of.
And so we'd say the integrity of the vote, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you assign that to someone else, you are beginning to loosen those strands. This was something that happened during COVID when the Democrats were in the majority in the House of Representatives. I was not present at that time, but I heard stories about how there would be very few members on the floor, and they had card after card after card of other members that they were using to vote on their behalf while they were there, with those members maybe not even watching the events transpiring on the floor, the debate that was taking place, the procedural movement that was going on, and you've just got somebody there who's now not even the elected member of that district working on behalf of 20 or 30 or 40 other members. That can be problematic, and I think people can understand that. And that's not to say we don't appreciate and respect the maternal and paternal interests of people who have a child. I think that's something that we can both respect in a meaningful way, but not open that door to proxy voting in a way that kind of dissolves some of that expectation. Because we have a Capitol for a reason, right? That's where people go to expect to see their government in action taking place. Whether they agree or disagree with their member of Congress, they ought to be able to go and witness that in person. We are an open and transparent government. We ought to be able to see that in person. I can give you another example. When I was in Lansing as a state lawmaker, every single member of the state legislature has a desk assigned to them on the floor of either the House of Representatives or the Senate, and there is a panel that you use to cast your vote. Only the elected member from that specific district is authorized to push the buttons on that desk. You have to be the elected member assigned to that district to push the button panel there. So it is illegal for anyone else to interface with that button panel. In fact, during my orientation in the State House when I was elected a decade ago, they told us this. They said it is a felony to push the button of another member on the floor of the House of Representatives. And I went home and I told my wife, I said, honey, it is a felony to push my buttons. And she has yet to be held accountable for that.
Yeah, so, that's for sure. I can only imagine. And I know exactly what you're talking about, what button. What about Cory Booker's filibuster that he did the other day for 25 hours?
25 hours.
18 minutes or something?
Yeah.
Were you here for that, or was that when you were gone, too?
I believe that may have begun while we were organizing our effort to leave. So I was aware that was going on in the background, but I was really feverishly working on the arrangements to get down to Mexico. I didn't observe or watch much of it. I can tell you I don't think I would have the endurance of standing there for 25 hours and some change. That's something that I don't think many people would have the endurance to be able to do.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.